We are live again on TikTok. See, TikTok is probably having some issues these days. Yeah.
Probably are. I mean, turn the entire platform down and then bring it all back up all within 24 hours. That's not an easy task to do.
Yeah. We're checking if we're live here, and if we are, we'll go right into the show. We're live on everywhere but TikTok. All right, if you guys can cut in TikTok at some point, that would be great. Have an image here that I'm going to pop up for you, and it is the image of a local car event. Are you guys able to get that image up? All right. The car events in the United States, there are some very prestigious ones, and some of the big ones are Pebble Beach, for example, in California. This Concours d'Elegance is part of that, and it is a local car event, which really mirrors the one in Pebble Beach, except on a smaller scale, but some very exclusive cars. So, interesting thing about this is some of my old exotic car buddies came to me a few months ago, and they're volunteers on the Concours d'Elegance for this Arizona, which they've been doing for 11 years now, I believe. And they said, our cars always are ICE-type cars, and sometimes even into alternative energy like steam engines. But we've never had an electric car. What do you recommend? Yeah, how do we go into the 21st century and begin including what is rapidly becoming a main mode of transportation?
Right.
So we took them over to EV Preserve, which is our EV storage facility, and showed them a couple of very historic electric vehicles. We have Founder Series Tesla number 3 Roadster and Founder Series number 3 Tesla Model S. The Founders Series cars are typically pre-production, and they're reserved for family members, financial investors, the large VC-type groups. And this particular customer ended up with both Founders number 3 versions, and he's storing them at EV Preserve. They are also for sale, by the way. For those of you interested, you can go to Gruber Motors, Roadsters for sale, and you can see the history on those cars. So anyway, we said, these cars are probably about as good as it's going to get unless you go 100 years prior to 1907 and you get those original Baker electric cars or the taxi cabs that were running around New York City. So they liked this particular genre of cars, and we were originally going to bring both the Model S and Model 3. But because they limited to 100 cars, they decided to take only the Tesla Roadster to that event, which was a 2008. And I have a picture for you here. Let's bring up the picture of the car at the event. There we go. Now, here what you see is the radiant red Tesla Founders number 3 Roadster with the group of judges that were hovering around the car, trying to figure out how to grade something like this. And it got a bit humorous. They had a number of questions. At one point, I was in the car, and what you're supposed to do at that point is prove that it runs. And they said, okay, turn it on now. I did, and nothing happened. And they looked kind of quizzically, and I said, it's on. So then I made the noise, vroom, vroom. We had a good laugh, right? Under the hood, of course, it wasn't anything like what they were expecting. And I did open the trunk for them as well to show them the electronics. But they were pretty impressed with this car because it deviated from everything they've been judging for as long as they've been participating in this. And at one point, I have a picture of the group of them having a picture taken by this car. So I knew that they enjoyed it and liked it. Got a few more images here for you. Now, remember, this was a historic event in that this had never happened before. EVs weren't considered highly collectible or pedigreed, to this extent anyway. What you're seeing there on the left is a yellow Enzo, about a 10-year-old car or so. And then there's a Aston Martin, one of 99 built. But behind those is a 1932 Bugatti Atlantic, which is now a $50 million car. The last I heard, one sold to Ralph Lauren of Polo fame for $40 million. There were some seriously exclusive cars at this event. There was a one of Pagani just behind the Enzo here. I think I have a picture of that for you. And let's look at the 1932 Bugatti Atlantic first. This car is actually a magnesium body, and what you're seeing there is some seams with rivets. And the reason they have rivets all over this car to put the body panels together is magnesium ignites. So you certainly can't weld it. It would burn to the ground. And they're even cautious about doing any kind of grinding because it heats the metal sufficiently where it could ignite.
Yeah, yeah.
So the body work that you see on this, which of course is flawless, was a group of serious craftsmen who actually had to pound the metal into this level of perfection
Wow.
manually. And today that car is worth about $50 million. It's a local car here from Scottsdale, Arizona. Let me see if I have the other one here I was going to show you. No, I don't have the Pagani, apparently. That was a 100% carbon fiber car. So anyway, we did not win any trophy because of the exclusive cars that were at this event. But I can tell you this, since I was there all day Sunday, the amount of attention that Tesla Roadster attracted was right up there with the exotics that you see that were worth 50 million or into beyond seven figures.
Now, are you into sports at all?
Not really, but try me.
Okay. So, college football recently expanded their playoffs to 12 teams, and yesterday Ohio State beat Notre Dame. They're the national champions. It's like whoop-de-doo, big deal. But there were a couple of teams there that they were just glad to be invited to the party to see whether or not they belonged. And I think of the Roadster that way. Our own Arizona State University was one of those colleges that they, there is no way they would ever have even sniffed the level of competition that they had to go up against. And one of the most exciting football games in the entire college football season was when Arizona State played the University of Texas. Unfortunately, ASU lost, but that's okay. I think of that here. You don't know what a Roadster might look like to somebody who's just an outsider. We're kind of jaded. We see 50 or 60 of these in our shop at any given time.
Right.
We have EV Preserve with 25 of them. That's so cool to see a car like this. And the Roadster is such a beautiful car to get the same level of attention as the $50 million cars that are sitting out there.
And the Roadster, I think there's another reason that everything you say resonates. It is not just any electric car. It is the electric car that started the EV revolution.
Yes, it is.
There were plenty of false starts, like we were talking about 1907, the Bakers, the taxicabs in New York. Well, that never went very far because Bendix eventually developed a starter motor. The crank was no longer necessary, and it became a mainstream vehicle that everybody could drive.
Right.
Then you had the ill-fated EV1 in 1994, where GM built 1,700 EVs, electric cars, and then decided after a year or two that there was no market for electric cars and retrieved them all and crushed them.
Yes.
So that was another false start. But it wasn't until the Tesla Roadster was released and, Tesla survived because of the Model S, that electric cars finally started to head toward mainstream. So the Roadster is, I did a speech in Flachau, Austria at the Tesla Takeover, and my main theme was, what do you think would have happened if Tesla did not make it and the Roadster sent them into bankruptcy? Who else would have started the EV revolution? It certainly wasn't going to be Ford or GM or the incumbents.
No.
So it is a historic event, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other kinds of EVs will eventually show up at these kinds of events. I felt a little bit out of place because I call it the Concours d'Elegance, and it is actually Concours d'Elegance, but I don't speak that French, so with that French accent, but... Anyway, it was a wonderful event. For those of you interested, there is a website that you can look up, and it is the Arizona Concours d'Elegance at the Scottsdale Civic Center. All right, moving right along here, we've got a headline here. Um, Trump to end EV mandate. What that means for Tesla stock and the market in general.
There's a lot to unpack from what happened yesterday with President Trump and all of the executive orders that he's been working on and that he put into effect. A lot of those orders were along the lines of energy, and that includes electric vehicles and emission standards and things like that. So, the first question I want to ask, is there really truly a federal EV mandate? And there's not.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What there is, however, is that first you have a California state mandate. The state of California has mandated that ICE vehicle sales be stopped in their state by 2035. They have an exemption to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency rule that basically says if they make mandates that are more strict than the EPA, they're okay to do that. It was put in place back in the times of at the very beginning of the EPA, so like the late 60s, and they were allowed to do that, and it's stood for a couple of generations now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, under President Biden, the EPA did, however, mandate far stricter tailpipe emission standards than had ever been mandated before. And when the EPA published those standards, and they were recommended by the Biden administration, the EPA even said, if you want to meet the standards that we have coming out, by 2032, you'll probably have to have some sort of either zero emission or ultra low emission vehicle in your fleet. And that's going to probably have to make up 2 out of every 3 car sales that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to meet the EPA standards, of course, the only zero emission vehicle that's viable right now in the marketplace is a battery electric. So that's where people are saying it's an EV mandate. Yeah, okay, it's kind of semantics, but I get it. Yesterday, President Trump issued, amongst his many executive orders, an order to roll back the EPA emission standards that had been in place during the Biden administration. He has the authority to do that, so those standards are rolled back. That means that the traditional automakers are going to be free to choose what type of autos they have without the fear of a government of falling afoul of our federal government regulations. There is a lot of talk about President Trump suing the state of California, basically trying to reverse the California exemption to the EPA standards that they have enjoyed for over 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens and is successful, and that's a big if, that would have a much wider impact in the EV marketplace than what Trump has done already. And I think what Trump's has done already will have a wide impact. Here's why. The California program, in order for industry makers to meet the environmental standards that are in California, you've heard of carbon credits.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of a carbon credit is that companies are expected to produce a certain level of pollution. When a company produces far less than the level of pollution that they're expected to produce, that means they have a paper credit that says, hey, I'm producing less than what's supposed to be there. There's value if they can combine their output with a highly polluting company's output, and together the two companies can be producing at or below the environmental standard. That's called a carbon credit. Mm-hmm. The higher polluting companies pay big money to the lower polluting companies to get these carbon credits so they can still sell their cars.
So you can sell them fundamentally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, GM can't make its pickup trucks or its SUVs with the mileage that they have because they produce too much pollution. But they're GM's most profitable cars by far. So what do? GM goes to Tesla, Ford goes to Tesla and says, hey, you have carbon credits available for sale. We want to buy them.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2018, Tesla has received almost $10 billion in revenue from carbon credit sales.
That's staggering, isn't it?
It is, because there's no cost to this revenue. It goes immediately to the bottom line.
100% margin.
100%. So if this program goes away, 25% of Tesla's net profit from 2018 forward would disappear.
Mhm.
Tesla's ability to be profitable in the future is severely hindered because they depend on these carbon credits. For startup EV makers, Rivian is the one that I think of the most, is probably the most impacted. Rivian has $300 million in revenue coming in 2024 for carbon credits.
Mhm.
Because like Tesla, they don't produce pollution. They have cars that don't pollute.
Right.
If a car maker that's burning through cash like Rivian all of a sudden loses several $100 million of revenue, it's going to make their road that much tougher.
Well said. Well said. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Looks like we've got some comments coming in. Instagram, McNell's1 says, yo.
Yo.
Instagram, tjs.tech.niche says, why did they destroy all of the EV1s? Well, the CEO of GM at the time is famously quoted as saying, there's no future in electric cars. Since the cars were not owned by the individuals driving them, they were owned by GM Leasing.
Mm-hmm.
They controlled the product, and it's still a mystery as to why crushing seemed to be the most sensible option back then, although there's a lot of conspiracy theorists that are saying that maybe it was big oil that killed this car. But yeah, it is a mysterious footnote in history. There's even a movie that's been produced about this, Who Killed the Electric Car. If you're interested, look that up, and you can see what the speculations are. YouTube, Freckless X20. We weren't sure whether anybody was going to notice. He says, no sunglasses, question mark.
No sunglasses.
No sunglasses going forward. We now realize that it's time for the video, the explanation.
Yes.
And we're not prepared to give that in these podcasts, but it'll be an interesting video for you to watch, and we're going to work on that and then release that so that the mystery at the Gruber companies as to why sunglasses are always involved in any social media presentations will finally be revealed and debunked.
That's right. It's I'm looking forward to being part of that video and seeing how that goes. But yes, no sunglasses. And then YouTube, Freckles20 says Trump is wrong.
Okay.
You know, I personally actually believe it's time for a change like this.
Why is that?
Look, I get that government support for EVs is very nice for the EV industry. China has gotten where they are with half of the cars being EVs, largely because of government support. But personally, I think the EV industry has gotten to the point where it can stand on its own 2 feet. There are some nagging problems in the EV industry, such as the battery price, such as range, such as charging infrastructure, that are slowly being solved, I think are going to be more quickly solved if you don't have as much government interference.
Okay.
And I honestly believe that if EVs are allowed their spot at the table on what is perceived as equal footing, the politics will go away and people will begin to look at EVs for what they are. Are they a better product or are they not? Based on whatever individual's economic values are rather than political values. That's what's going to give EVs a better chance to shine. Because I think the EV is actually a superior product to the ICE vehicle engine.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
What do you think about so I know this is kind of a little bit different, but I feel like it ties into the same thing. What about the tariffs that are supposed to be hitting? 25%, I think, is already going to be in effect in February to Canada and Mexico to start with. How do you think that's going to affect the EV industry?
I think it will have a big impact on the EV industry. Canada and Mexico are our 2 biggest trading partners. There is so much however, that was coming from China that is now coming from the US, that it's going to be less impactful on the EV industry than you might have thought of. Um, you know, Tesla has not finished their gigafactory in Mexico. They're still building most of their cars, North American cars, right here in the US. As just a for example. And the Biden administration, when they wanted the EV credits, that EV credit was typically only for made in the USA type of parts. So Canada and Mexico are not very much a part of that particular equation. So for EVs directly, I think the tariffs are not going to have a huge impact, but for industry overall, just because there is going to be such a big impact in industry overall, I think it's going to make a difference.
Well, as my son put it, with this new administration, we're in for a wild ride.
Oh
Just
my
hang on.
gosh. Yes, we are.
Instagram, Daddy O Week says, "Yay, I prefer eyes." Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've been accused of hiding things and or being aliens, and our eyes glow red. So it proves that they do not. And Ray is joining us from YouTube. Welcome, Ray. He says, Doug DeMuro on the Toyota BZ4X EV. The car is only selling with a massive discounts and incentives. Toyota is using this as an example to say, see, nobody likes electric cars. No, you made a bad one. People buy Teslas because they're good. They are good cars and good value. You just made a bad one. In fact, the worst one. I think the BZ4X and Solterra are the worst electric cars on sale. Our thoughts.
I agree with Ray.
Okay.
I don't. I have seen a little bit of the BZ4X. It's not a car that I would want to buy. You know, the EV that my wife and I own outside of the Tesla that I drive is a Volvo. We love the Volvo. It's a well-made car, first and foremost. That is much more the reason why we love the Volvo than that it's an EV, although it sure is nice to be able to just plug it in at night.
Yeah. Well, you know, watching Toyota unravel after becoming the auto giant that they evolved into is disappointing and interesting at the same time. One of the articles that we were that's on the agenda today, and I'll go into it now since we're talking about Toyota. This is from Torque News. And the headline goes like this, or the article goes like this. In a surprising move, Toyota has significantly raised the price of its hybrid batteries across the globe, leaving many hybrid vehicle owners and independent repair shops and the battery reconditioning industry reeling. In Hawaii, for example, the cost of a hybrid battery has surged from $1,700 in 2024 to $3,600 in 2025. And in California, the price jumped from $1,600 to $3,200. What's behind this dramatic price hike? How can a hybrid vehicle owner deal with the fallout?
Yeah, and I took some time, read through the article in detail. They said there are three things, and I personally, it's just boo on Toyota to me.
Mm-hmm.
First is potentially legitimate. The Toyota hybrid batteries, especially the ones on their Priuses, that's pretty much what we're talking about here, are still made with nickel metal hydride.
Mm-hmm.
That's an older technology. It has never been replaced with lithium ion. They've never gone that route, even to retrofit or anything like that. And those prices are going up. Toyota wants to recoup losses. In other words, Toyota is saying we're selling fewer hybrids because other people are selling more EVs. So we're going to try to keep our profits. The way we're going to keep our profits is by jacking up the price because we can.
Right.
It's like saying if you can sell one widget for $100 because you can, and instead of selling 10 widgets for $10 each because it only costs you $2 to make them, you're going to sell one widget for $100. It's just greedy, man. And finally, it says they want to force owners to look at new cars. Apparently, Prius owners are incredibly loyal,
Mm-hmm.
and Prius owners love their Priuses.
That's true. Yeah.
And so rather than go and buy either a new Prius or another new Toyota, they hold on to their old Priuses. And when the batteries go down, they simply buy a new battery and put it in, and they're set to go for another 100,000 miles.
Yeah, they are reliable cars. You know, early on when Gruber Motor Company got started, we didn't have all of the Tesla business that we do now, the Tesla Roadsters, for example. So we were repairing Ford Fusions, Chevy Bolts, Priuses.
Yep.
And back then, if you had a Prius, the battery cost around $5,500 to $6,000, and this was for a car that might be 5, 10 years old. So the owners that were faced with a battery replacement sold these cars for as low as $500 a piece because to them they were boat anchors.
Right.
With these new prices, of course, that would have been better if it was a $1,700 battery or even $3,600. But yeah, Toyota, it's reminiscent of some of the other large, successful companies that just continuously started to get it wrong. And there are plenty of examples throughout history.
I actually think early in my career of IBM and their PC. The IBM had the market on PCs. They 95% of the market, but a few of their components, and there were a couple of competitors out there. Michael Dell with PCs Limited, it became Dell Computer, Compaq. They had these so-called clones or compatible, and
IBM clones, I remember that.
IBM clones. And when IBM discovered that the clones were out there and there's nothing they could do to shut down the clone business, they decided to make the PS2. And that was a different PC, and it was not compatible with anything else in the marketplace.
Right.
And the idea was that they were going to change the marketplace, and the competitors would never be able to catch up because they were going to have a closed architecture. They were going to license anything, and it was, in fact, just the opposite happened.
And it backfired.
It backfired, and IBM never recovered as far as their PC business.
Yeah, yeah. Many other examples. Kodak, Digital Equipment Corporation. We could go on and on.
Yeah.
All right, so here's an interesting headline. More people now work in clean energy than in fossil fuels. We're talking about the oil industry. Nearly 40 million people worldwide work in jobs related to clean energy, with 13 million more jobs to be created by the year 2030, only 5 years away. You know, for those of us that were around in the last century, I don't think we could have envisioned this.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. I don't know very many people who are not at least passingly interested in clean energy and what it can do for them. Most people that don't have familiarity with clean energy and its benefits and what it can do will at least say, hey, if I can get solar panels on my roof and I end up paying less per month for solar panels than I would pay in electricity, yeah, I might consider that. It's economics.
So I've got an image to pop up here. We'll get to a few of the questions here in a second. This was an interesting headline. What happens when a company stops using social media? We're very familiar with the amount of work that's involved in feeding social media. In fact, some of the comments are it's like feeding a monster. It is very time consuming. It is very expensive. And we're in it because we recognize the future is social media, especially with AI hurtling towards us.
Oh, yes.
So the question here is, what happens when a company stops using social media? And these are companies that are finally fed up. They say, well, enough is enough. Let's go back to the traditional methods of staying visible in a particular market. This graph, let me see if I can full screen this for you. It might make it a little bit more. Nope, I guess I can't. All right. Maximize. There we go. Full screen. Nope, it's not going to work. All right. Yeah, there. Okay. Thank you, Jesse. That's about as big as it gets. Okay. So after a month, let me get down to the portion of the article here. what happens when a company stops using social media? This particular research organization looked at 16 companies with more than 100,000 social followers that stopped posting content on their social media profiles because they felt it was a waste of time. Here's what happened. Within 6 months, their organic social media traffic dropped 94% on average, and their revenue declined by 6%. They say don't take organic social media for granted. Even if it doesn't drive much direct sales, it can cause indirect sales over time.
The people who produce this graph, I'm very familiar with, Neil Patel and NP Digital. They're one of the leading online marketing firms in the marketplace today. He's right. If you look at social media as simply another marketing channel, then your views of how social media gets used may change. Marketing at its most basic is, I have a product I want to sell you, and I want to sell Jesse, and I want to sell Aaron, and I want to sell Cass. What do? I tell you guys about it. My market, it's now 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
I've told 4 people about it. If none of you wants it, then I don't have any sales. If all of you want it, then I have 4 sales. Well, maybe I want more than 4 sales. Well, I need to tell more people. If I can use some sort of an online platform to tell more people, let's say I post a Facebook video that goes viral. Suddenly I've told 100 million people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably going to be much easier to get 4 sales out of 100 million people than it is to get 4 sales out of 4 people. That is marketing, plain and simple. Social media takes a lot of effort. It's cheap to do the postings, but it's hard to make the content. Mm-hmm. I get it. But you're right. And that's one of the reasons why we continue working at this. We know that it works. And honestly, when was the last time we had paid advertising for Gruber Motors?
Right. The traditional, and we go way back. I mean, 40 years. It's even before the age of the internet. It used to be that in order to take your services or product and create visibility in an industry, you had to do direct mail, for example. You had to fly people all over the world or United States to trade shows. Extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. We're talking about travel costs, rental cars, meals per diem, and then the entrance fees to these trade shows were extremely expensive. And you then had, some measure of success in that you became somewhat visible. With the age of the internet, that changed everything. You were now able to reach people in an information age, and there were no limits. And the cool part was our first website, for example, was pretty primitive and crude, but we were as visible as AT&T at the time or any of these large companies. You had suddenly a level playing field, and the size of your actual bricks and mortar operation was irrelevant. It was your visibility in social media or during the information age that really propelled you and your services company or your products. We find the same is true with social media. It is unavoidable. Yes, it's very expensive, time-consuming, requires a lot of investment on our parts. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the reason we do this is it's not just all of that, it's fun. What we also find, though, is that the results are not always measurable. It wasn't like direct mail, where you knew you sent out 10,000 emails or flyers, right, through snail mail, and you got a certain number of returns. Right. You could put numbers to that. Right. With social media, it's not possible to do that. It's not as measurable.
Yeah. How do you tell that you had a social media response when you put out a social media post and you get 3 more calls tomorrow that you don't know for sure if they came from social media or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe you would normally have gotten 20 calls. Now you get 23. You don't know unless you ask the question. And even if you ask the question, if you have several social media channels, which one's working and which one's not, you don't know. What we do know is Gruber Motors gets about 10 times the number of leads as Gruber Industries or Gruber Power Services.
With 0 salespeople.
And there's 0 salespeople and there's 0 online paid advertising with Gruber Motors.
Yeah. And the other businesses we have call centers.
Yeah.
We have staff that continuously makes calls, which kind of leads me into another topic here. Aptera was at CES.
Yes.
And I looked at the company. They have a wonderful product, by the way. I'm not going to disparage anything about Aptera's technology. It is cool. It is timely. It is exactly what is required for us to go into this new sustainable energy, mode. Solar on the car, for example. Not drawing on power grid, using the energy from the sun, and a very futuristic design. But they're in serious cash burn mode. So they were, I looked at their booth. They had outside and inside. It was a huge investment. And I thought to myself, I know why they're doing it. They're in serious cash burn mode. They're trying to attract more investment, but they needed that type of visibility in order to keep the investment coming in.
Right.
Chris Anthony, the CEO of Aptera, was saying that there are some huge expenses coming up to get anything to production status. That included, airbag testing and crash testing.
Okay.
Into 7 figures. And the reason that I'm going into this topic is there are other EV startups that are struggling, and they don't have the carbon credits because they're not producing any vehicles yet.
Right.
They're totally reliant on investors that see a future in that product. We just lost Canoo. That's one of the ones that we have the backdrop on. And Canoo has filed for not just Chapter 11, but Chapter 7. They're finished. They're done. They're liquidating.
Yeah, they announced that they were shutting down operations this week, and they're going to sell off their assets to pay their creditors.
Yes, exactly. And this was a company that had some really interesting potential clients, which included NASA, the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. Postal Service, the state of Oklahoma, and Walmart to boot, who all believed in the products and the company. But unfortunately, the investment capital just did not keep up with the cash burn. And eventually, that was their only recourse. Got a bunch of questions coming in. YouTube Spoonie412 says, the use of more power than being produced is raising the premium, at least in Pennsylvania. So your electrical costs are going up, it sounds
Sure,
like.
makes sense. On TikTok, Rigo Gutierrez asks, do you guys think that the Trump administration would win a lawsuit against the California EPA standards?
What do you think?
I'm not going to say it's impossible. I do think it's a serious uphill battle. There is so much precedent that's been set that to allow states to do that. I think it's going to be difficult at best.
Mm-hmm. Question from Instagram, TJS Technique says, how is Tesla so successful without ever producing a single ad for their vehicles? Well, a number of brilliant moves, in my opinion, by Tesla. First of all, they were the first ones. Being the first ones generally gives you a serious advantage. It's the Johnny-come-lately, the Apteras and the Rivians and all the rest of them that are struggling, trying to match Tesla's success. But some brilliant moves by Tesla is moving the product into malls rather than creating dealerships. And simply put, how many people on the weekend drive to a car dealership to see the new cars? Virtually none that I know of, because you're going to be mobbed by commission-breathing salespeople as you're trying to get into the building before you even get to see the cars. It was a brilliant move in that that's where people go, in the malls. And while you're walking through, my wife likes to shop for clothes. I don't like shopping for clothes. If there's a tech component at the mall, that's where I am. Yeah. Or Nespresso coffee. That was another good one. But I was always at the Tesla store. Now, of course, you see they're all copying it. Lucid is there. Electromechanica Solo was there. Polaris Polestar is there.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that was one of the moves. The other one was referral credits. People were knocking themselves out to get that $250,000 Tesla Roadster. Most of them never even got close, but they referred a bunch of people to Tesla. And then, of course, the final one is you make a great product. You make a product that creates a wow factor with the customer. And when that happens, they tell all of their friends and their family members, and and the next thing you know, you've turned your customers into salespeople, so you don't have to hire any. So that's my opinion why Tesla was
Well,
so
Pete,
successful without changing.
Don't
without
forget
an
about firing one into space.
Yeah, there were many other brilliant moves.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder sometimes, was it premeditated, or did they just say, you know what, do we have cinder blocks and anvils, or what do we have that we can send instead of a $30 million satellite that no one's giving us to prove that this rocket can go into space? And Elon decided, well, I got a couple of roadsters. I'm not going to send Founders number 1, but VIN 587 isn't that important, and it's about the right weight. So let's take the battery out and let's put it on the front of the rocket.
Well, and you just mentioned something too that I think has given Tesla a unique advantage, is Elon.
Yeah.
You've in Elon, you have a CEO who seems to have a natural knack for understanding what it takes to market the company.
Mm-hmm.
He's very, very good at that. He's very good at being out in the open and saying his things, for better or for worse. He knows that controversy brings eyes to Tesla.
And he definitely thinks outside the box.
Yes, he does.
Which we're continuously seeing.
And those are also some of the things I think that have helped Tesla greatly in their success.
Yep. Spoonie412 from YouTube says the heater in the EV works better than ice. True, because it heats up faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember back east?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you had to wait for that engine to get nice and warm before you got any sort of heat in the cabin.
Yeah, and in fact, he continues and says the patience to wait for the thermostat to open wastes energy.
Mm-hmm. Also, he says EMF ice dethawers will improve the conversion rate. Good point.
Yeah.
Instagram Daddy O Week says, great products. I have convinced several people to buy Tesla because it's the best car I've ever owned or driven.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see what else we've got here. So we talked about Toyota. Oh, you've got an article on the single crystal battery.
Yeah, that was a really interesting take that I found, and I think it could be an exciting development for the future. I'm going to try to not get too technical or sciencey on this, but the idea on batteries is that you have a cathode and an anode. One is a positive, one's a negative, and you have some sort of electrolyte in the middle, and that's that electrolyte that's made up of either lithium salts or sodium salts or potassium salts, or
facilitates the transfer of electrons.
and all it's doing is facilitating the transfer of electricity. Over time, these batteries degrade. The ions degrade, and a big part of it is because they're not solid. So enter solid state batteries, and solid state batteries have been made out of graphene is one of the more promising ones. They're very expensive. Now scientists are talking about a single crystal that has the ability to transfer electricity similar to a solid state battery. These crystals that they're working in the labs right now to take and work with, basically they're like a solid state battery, except they degrade even less over time than the solid state batteries that are made of things like graphene. And if this is able to go out to its logical course and become a commercialized product, we could be looking at batteries that have tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of charge cycles available.
Amazing.
Think of what would happen if you had a car that had a battery that could go for 100,000 charge cycles before it started to degrade.
Mm-hmm.
And you multiply that by 300 miles per cycle. That's 30 million miles on one battery.
Wow. I know guys that own Teslas that are going to test that theory and drive those millions of miles.
Oh yeah. And that's what they're talking about, is that they've already tested some of these crystalline batteries in the lab with as much as 20 to 30,000 cycles that they're seeing before the battery starts to degrade. So here it's all about battery degradation. There's something here. it's another area of improvement that they're talking about in science. We've talked about energy density, being able to have more range with smaller batteries. Now we're talking about longevity, being able to use the same battery many, many more times than you could traditionally. To give a good comparison, right now, lithium iron phosphate batteries can be recharged somewhere around 2,000 times before they start to experience significant degradation and eventually fail. And so they've already got these batteries up to 30,000 cycles.
Amazing. And of course, battery technology will continue to evolve. I'd hate to be a battery manufacturer because as you get your production set up, the technology can change on you overnight.
Absolutely.
Interesting comment here from Instagram. Daddy O Week says, and he's talking about the idea of sending the Roadster into space. Where did it come from? He said it was a young girl who suggested it to Elon on Twitter, sending that car into space. Brilliant. And, it resonates because Elon has a lot of children.
Yeah.
I think 11 or 12 or something now.
Okay.
But the story about the gigacasting, it goes something like this. One of his sons had a little Hot Wheels car, and his dad took it, flipped it over, and thought, you know what, here's an aluminum casting. Why can't this be scaled? Why are we putting all of these parts together to make a frame for a car? Extraordinarily labor-intensive and lots of parts and supply chain issues. Why not just make a gigantic casting? And allegedly, that's what created the idea for the large casting that Tesla is using now, and other EV manufacturers or car manufacturers are beginning to look into.
Well, when a car manufacturer sees that their competition can make a better car that's both comes to market faster because there's a lot less labor and has somewhere between 30 and 50% less manufacturing costs, they're going to take notice.
This one I'm not quite following, but let's read it anyway. YouTube Spoonie412 says, stasis in your crotch likely refers to a condition called pelvic venous insufficiency, PVI. We'll need more clarification on that. Oh, we're talking about the heater in a car? All right, the guys are scrolling up the answers, the previous.
That's a
I was trying to find the answer. Sorry.
Okay.
that's kind of an interesting comment. Yes.
Yeah.
Now Ray Johnson did clarify. He said his aforementioned Toyota posting was actually Mr. DeMuro's comments and opinion, not his.
Thank you, Ray, for the
Thanks.
clarification. Yes, Doug does have some interesting insights. So one of the things that we also came across was Kia just delayed the Supercharger access for its EVs. The rollout was supposed to start this week, but it looks like that isn't happening. And then they gave a list of some of the other cars that are scheduled to be on this next system. But it doesn't really say why this was being delayed. And we're talking about Kia's EV9, EV6, who were supposed to get access to over 16,000 Tesla Superchargers January 15th. It's been delayed, and we'll probably report as more details come in on that.
Definitely will. If you remember that the big announcements and rollouts, the conversion of everybody
Yeah.
to the next standard, you realize they all said they would be, by the end of 24, they'd be done.
I don't remember that, but yeah, that's kind of a lofty goal, isn't it?
It was kind of a lofty goal. And with the exception of, I think Rivian got access. I think General Motors got access, or Ford. I don't remember which one. Only one of the two. I do know that Volvo got access. Owning a Volvo, we got the notice, and they have access to the Supercharger network. That's about it.
We were involved in that. If you think about it, we boldly went into a potential NACS conversion for the Tesla Roadster.
Yes.
Because that level 1 charge connector that they have is completely proprietary. And we actually tracked down the company that originally made it because we're trying to replicate. And it turns out that the cost at the scale that we need them is prohibitive. It's not anything that we're going to be able to sell to customers.
Right.
So we were headed toward the next conversion, thinking, wouldn't it be cool if you could open your Tesla Roadster charge port door and just go to, a destination charger? It wouldn't be DC fast charging at the superchargers, and charge at the same time that the other sexy vehicles are charging. It turns out there were complexities well beyond what we originally anticipated, including a latching mechanism that now needed to be contended with,
Yeah.
including some additional logic in the power electronics module. And then the final one was temperature sensing for safety issues.
Right.
That one is the one that stalled us. And then finally, there was a lawsuit by Tesla with a company that was making the fast breakaway connector.
Correct.
And we've put that on pause at this point in time until some of those technical issues can be solved. But we may eventually have a next conversion for the Tesla Roadsters. Trump nominee, here's another headline, says EVs should pay for road use. We're talking about the U.S. Transportation Secretary nominee, Sean Duffy. Has he been nominated yet, though, or is it still in...
His nomination is still pending confirmation with the Senate.
Okay.
He is. They've only confirmed maybe one or two of Trump's people. He was not one of the ones. Reading behind the story headline, because the headline is very inflammatory. His idea actually has potentially some merit. I have to admit.
Also, Mark, I'd like to hear this.
Well, ICE vehicles pay a road tax.
They do indeed, yes. Yeah.
And people forget that they're paying road tax every time they fill up their fuel tank with gasoline.
Correct.
And so that road tax equates to about 17 cents, 18 cents per gallon of gasoline. And so a larger vehicle that uses more fuel automatically pays a higher road tax because they get less miles per gallon. Well, since an EV doesn't use gasoline, they don't pay a road tax.
Right.
And since the market is shifting toward electric vehicles, and I'm still convinced that that shift is inevitable, it will occur.
Oh, yeah.
The federal highway fund is going to never be as high as it has been.
Mm-hmm.
If, for example, if 50% of autos are EVs, new autos are being sold as EVs in 2035, then the federal highway fund will get half the revenue that it was getting.
So what funds the upkeep on our roads? And do we become a third world country full of potholes as a result?
Exactly. So
Makes sense.
So there is something that makes sense here about how that the fact that EVs, people who drive electric vehicles, should pay their own fair share for the use of the roads.
Mm-hmm.
There is something to that. I don't. Now, he didn't have any good ideas, and I don't have any good ideas. That's why I'm not in government.
We just know it's going to cost us money in some fashion or other.
It may be like the state of Texas that has a premium on their automobile registration for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens. The state of Texas, of course, put enough premium onto electric vehicles that they could effectively raise the road revenue, not just make it equal. But it's you don't know.
Yeah. So we are not intentionally trying to put script writers out of business, because we've never really had a script writer here. But one of the things at the end of each of these podcasts that we like to do is share with you some one-liners, kind of like Saturday Night Live, the Weekend Report.
Yep.
And we're free to admit this is AI that's generating this for us. That's our script writer.
Yep. Now we have one TikTok real quick that
Okay.
just came in. W. Howie says, "That's what I'm saying. GPS kilometer tracking."
Interesting. Okay.
And then you get a road tax bill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a bad idea. You could do it for all cars, regardless of fuel type. That way,
And be completely fair, too, if you think about it.
it would be.
Yeah, based on use. So here's a one-liner that AI decided would be appropriate for our EV podcast. People say EVs are silent, but they clearly haven't heard me screaming when I see the repair bill.
Yeah. We used to worry about speeding tickets. Now it's all paying about those extra 15 minutes on the charger.
Yep. So my EV just told me it needs a software update. Remember when all cars needed was an oil change.
I love how my new electric SUV has a ludicrous mode, but I never realized they were talking about the price tag.
Range anxiety? More like menu anxiety, trying to pick a restaurant that has a charger in the parking lot. And, we're doing that too,
Yeah.
That becomes important at times.
It sure does.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us. As always, we appreciate all of our audience, viewers, and stay tuned. The next podcast is Tuesday next week. We'll also have the Roadster podcast at that time. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Take care.